Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool preview for you from a new brand called Mitch Mason. They're basically a new Kickstarter brand that are releasing their very first timepiece, which I kind of consider an everyday watch, although it does have some definite field watch elements to it. I think with kind of the more advanced design features and little details, they really made something that's very versatile here, and I think is going to show very well in video and definitely looks really great in the metal. So, some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for an everyday watch. Of course, you're going to really want that versatile blend of sporty and dressy attributes. This is their model. It's called the Chronicle, and it's pretty much their attempt at creating the perfect daily beater. It's definitely inspired by military field watches of World War II. And there are going to be some differences between this, which is a prototype, and the actual production models. Just to touch on those very quickly. The movement on here is going to be different. In the prototype you see here, this is actually an SW200, but the production model will be a Miyota 9039. The water resistance will be 200 meters on the production model. In the prototype, this is only 100 meters. And then basically, the seconds hand will also be shortened a little bit so that it actually doesn't overrun that outer track. So it's going to just align perfectly there, which will be great. There will also be deeper, more defined knurling on the crown, and overall just better fit and finish, which is something to be pretty expected when it comes to taking a preview of a prototype versus looking at the actual finished production model. So with all that said, let's go ahead and take a closer look. Okay, now one of the first things you probably noticed about this watch when the specs came across is the size. It's actually pretty small at 36.5 millimeters in diameter. It is 13.5 millimeters thick, or if you don't count that crystal, it's right about 12 millimeters. It is only 43 millimeters lug to lug, which is great. It is full 316L stainless steel. It is beautifully brushed and polished, and that's just in the prototype, so I can only imagine what the production model is going to look like. The crystal, of course, is a double dome sapphire with 5 layers of AR coating. And guys, let's just take this in. Just from a design perspective, this is a really good looking watch. I love the aspect of the dial, the brushing on it. It just adds another dimension. Of course, you do have the sandwich dial, kind of a mixture because you do have printed as well. I do enjoy the look of the patina loom. I don't think it's overly done. It doesn't look too orange. It has more of an ivory tone, which is what I really prefer when it comes to kind of that old radium style loom. I think it looks really nice. And as you can see here at different angles, it's a little easier. You can see that on the prototype, the seconds hand is a bit long. The nice thing is they've already actively looked into getting that shortened as far as the changes go. Now, the nice thing is because of this case, even though it's a little bit smaller, because it has relatively wide lugs, it actually has a decent amount of wrist presence. And then another nice thing is because they're actually very short lugs, even though it has nice wrist presence, it's not going to overpower a smaller wrist. It's still going to look great on a smaller wrist, and I think even on my 7.25-inch wrist, which is probably on the larger side of average, it still, I think, looks good. So this is a really well executed, well thought out design. Look at the high polished bevels all over this bad boy. The transition with the fine brushing. The case profile definitely screams a bit of Grand Seiko in some of these lines. This thing is just carved and chiseled in a way that really make it quite appealing. I'm really digging the way the light plays with the dial, and then of course the color play of the die and this beautiful leather strap, which is extremely nice, guys. I mean, even the keeper, look at the level of detail on that. And then you also do have, of course, this nicely done milled buckle there, also signed. Now, The bezel, of course, is a nice fixed bezel. I think it has great proportions compared to the dial. It helps the dial be a bit expansive, but I like that since that dial has that outer track there, it actually does feel, the dial doesn't feel empty. It feels more balanced versus sometimes on smaller watches you find people will try to make the dial a bit more expansive to try to carry more visual weight. I think with the finishing on and just the overall shape of this case, that's where it's going to draw its visual weight from. Beautifully done double dome sapphire crystal, as you can see. Since it's double domed, that means it's domed on the inside as well as the outside, which definitely helps reduce distortion. You can see still very much quite legible even at extremely harsh angles there, which is a very nice well thought out execution from that standpoint. As far as the crown goes, it is signed and it is screwed down. It is one thing that will be changed. Essentially, instead of having the finer knurling that's on here right now, the best way to think of it would be to basically have half the amount of knurling, but it just be thicker and deeper in grain, so you're going to have a stronger grip on that, which I think is going to be very nice and kind of offer a little bit more of a tool aesthetic versus right now a little bit of the more formal looking crown. Which I don't think looks bad in any way. So as far as the case back goes, really nicely done case back. Check it out. I'm digging that. Very nicely etched. It's just handsome. It's well done. It's a really good look, and you know, it doesn't really leave you desiring more, which is really nice. Also, you can see that you do have the quick release spring bars, and then the movement inside, of course, for this particular prototype is a Sellita, but you will get the Miyota inside of the production model. One thing I actually forgot to mention is that these are going to be on Kickstarter for about $379, and once they get to full retail, they're going to be at $499, so about $500. I think at the $500 mark, it's still quite a unique offering for what you get. But at $379, this is a real competitor, I think, in the space. It's really doing something that's different. That's kind of hard to compare to really a lot that's out there, just because of kind of all the elements that they've put together, and they wove them together in such a way that it really is quite a cohesive theme all the way throughout the design, which I definitely can appreciate. Now, to really focus on the dial, of course, you have that brushed blue sandwich dial. You have very nicely done polished hands with the painted accent seconds hand there. You do have Swiss Superluminova. This actually will glow green. I don't know which particular formula of Superluminova it is, but it does glow quite well. It is 200 meters of water resistance. So that will be for the production model. This particular one, you know, being the prototype, is only 100 meters. I'm not going to test it in the water or anything like that, but I figure you guys are watching the video to get an idea and a sneak preview of what the production model will be, and not, you know, an unattainable prototype. So I figure I'd definitely focus on the production specs versus some of these kind of one-off things that are done differently on the prototype. The lugs are 20 millimeters, which is great, so you can fit, you know, definitely going to be a strap monster. I can already see this thing on various nylon single pass straps, and I'm sure it's going to be absolutely killer. And then you actually do get this beautiful full green vegetable tanned Italian leather strap. I'm digging this nice step down taper here. Again, it's just another nice design feature. They could have gone for a regular taper. I like the step taper. It's kind of reminiscent of kind of pilot's watches and that IWC look, which I dig, for them to kind of blend that and play with those dimensions. You do have the quick release, the signed buckle, but you know what? Let's go ahead and get this piece on the wrist. Okay, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, it definitely wears on the smaller side, even up close though, where you typically get a lot of lens distortion, and it makes the watch look very oversized. I think with those very short lugs, it still looks really at home on the wrist, but then you get a little bit better perspective there, and I think it looks really great. You know, for somebody with a larger wrist, if you wear it a little bit further down your wrist there, I feel like it does help with the size a little bit, just proportionally visually. I think the watch over here, a little bit closer to the hand, feels a little bit more proportional. And then, of course, for you classic wearers that wear it more above the wrist bone, I tend to wear it kind of on or below most of the time. But I can acknowledge that I'm not the norm from that standpoint. But I think if you were a little bit higher up, it does accentuate the kind of smaller look to it. And I think it's definitely a nice look. And then if you look at the way that nice compact case lays on the wrist, I mean, that thing, it still drapes pretty nice. Obviously, it's not a long lug to lug on there, so it is quite short. So it does sit kind of stout on the wrist, but just in a really nice, and obviously it feels like a tool watch. Definitely still has that tool aesthetic to it, and just wears really nicely. And man, I'm loving just the case shape on here, and just the way the light catches over the brushing, and then just kind of dances over the polishing. Definitely very nice to look at, and totally wearable. So with that said, let's go ahead and actually set up some low light and lume shots. All right, let's go ahead and hit the lights. As you can see, the lume's really great. Very easy instant orientation, of course, with the lume numerals, and those actual larger portions there on that outer track, I think do a really good job of just lighting this up. It doesn't need to have necessarily so much lume on it, but where it's applied really, really well. And of course, the fact that it's a sandwich dial means that those numerals are definitely going to be looking quite good with the thickness level of lume that gets to be applied when it comes to those types. So one of the things I like to do in this segment is to actually do some low light transitioning, just so you can get an idea of how this watch kind of renders in less than optimal lighting, because you know, you're not always, obviously my studio lighting, it's more so representative of direct sunlight, but you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field. A lot of times you're going to be coming in and out of vehicles, you know, of course, transitioning in and out of buildings. Man, look at that. And it also gives you an idea of how these colors are going to render. So even everything from the color, pay attention to how the light plays with that leather and the sheen that's on there. And then, of course, the way the light plays with that dial. Also, you can see how legible this is going to be in kind of transitional lighting. Not quite dark, not quite light. And you can see that looks absolutely outstanding. Nice, vibrant pop of color there. Very, very legible still. And the nice thing is, even under harsher lighting conditions, as you can see here, which kind of are go against what the studio lights will show you, where it kind of can wash out a lot of those imperfections. Here you can get an idea, of course, of how some of that finishing looks, and you can watch how deep the luster is on the polished portions, and then, of course, how nice and uniform the brushing is on that case. So very, very nice. Man, this is a looker of a watch. Look at that. Let me put a little bit more. Just the sheen over that dial is insane. Very, very nice. And you can see now at this angle, super dark. It's a deep midnight blue now, as the light's not catching at this particular angle. So some closing thoughts on the wrist. This wears very similar to a 38, and that's really due to those wider lug shoulders, and then also the dial spacing does help the overall appearance, so it doesn't seem overly small. I mean, for me, with a 7¼ inch wrist, I tend to not really wear anything under 38, and I think honestly, even some watches with the wrong proportions at 38 can appear a bit small. This one is probably the smallest watch I've ever worn that still felt pretty comfortable, at least visually. Of course, on the wrist, smaller watches are always going to feel good, but I think the visual weight was still quite nice for this model as well. As far as model variations go, of course, you see this steel blue, kind of as shown. There's also a jet black, a desert sand, and a field gray. The field gray looks pretty interesting. Definitely not a color combination you often see. And then as far as comparable models go, it's tough to compare anything that's out there right now, But I guess you compare it with the upcoming Prospex Alpinist. That's going to be in a very similar vein to this. Even some of the color combinations, some of the kind of, I guess, what they're trying to accomplish, it sits a similar use case where it's kind of the evolution of a field watch being more of a daily driver. I think that's probably the closest thing I compare it to, especially with the more diminutive size and, of course, a very standard 20 millimeter lug. But this thing is going to be much cheaper, so, and also a higher beat movement. So I think that, of course, if you're into micro brands, that's something to always consider. You're supporting a smaller brand with a bigger story, which can be very exciting. I'd say bottom line is this is a very impressive and versatile little everyday field watch. And I'd say it's really for those with an eye for quality who enjoy a vintage aesthetic. If you like something with that vintage aesthetic, but you don't want to have like a scratched up plexiglass and, questionable water resistance and all that, you want to have that vintage aesthetic with a modern robustness of a watch from today. I think this really offers you that, and I think they've done an excellent job from a design perspective as well as an execution perspective. So definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.